Welcome back to the Beyond Cloud series of Discovery Discussions, presented by Intelligent HQ and hosted in London by Groupe INSEEC. Today we're meeting with Christian Verstraete, the Chief Technologist for Cloud for HP worldwide. Welcome back to the Beyond Cloud series of Discovery Discussions here at INSEEC London with Intelligent HQ. Today we're meeting with Christian Verstraete, the Chief Technologist for Cloud for HP worldwide, visiting us today as the Cloud Technologist. So I'd like to start off with a little bit of understanding about what a job title like that actually entails for an organization like HP. Clearly it's changed a little bit because of cloud, but it's not like that's a new thing, as we know. And tell me a little bit about what you see around the opportunities in this space.
Okay, so first of all, maybe what I do, which is I'm working with the different entities in the different parts of HP that provide multiple technologies that together will actually form our cloud offering. And I'm trying to coordinate them, or I'm part of the team that actually tries to coordinate them and really help them out and help them think beyond their own technology and how all of the bits and pieces actually can fit together.
I mean, that sounds really simple when it's a small company pulling in one direction, but I mean, HP, like some of the other, it's a huge organization, so yes. You must have a lot of just different definitions of cloud.
Yes, so what we did two things about 2 years ago. The one thing that we did is we came up with a consistent vision, which we called Converged Cloud. And the idea of Converged Cloud is that cloud is not one size fits all. So we realized that enterprises, and particularly large enterprises, first of all, will continue having their traditional IT environment. That's not going to go away anytime soon. But then we'll start consuming services from multiple different types of cloud. They will do some stuff on public clouds. They will rather prefer to keep some stuff in-house, but still use and take advantage of cloud-type technologies, which people call private clouds. And then they will start using cloud services that look like public clouds, but that are in environments that are more well-defined, with contracts that are more well-established, so that they can ensure all of the issues related to security, to compliance, and to all of these elements. And we call that managed clouds. And so what we started with was to say, hey, customers will probably have a combination of those. How do you make them work together? And that's the whole concept of converged clouds. The second thing that we then did is we created a functional reference architecture for cloud that can actually handle across the tree, so that we had a common yardstick that we could use with our different business units and our different technologies to say, hey, now where are you playing on the reference architecture? You're here, that's what you do, this is how you interact with the other people, this is how you work with them, this is what you expect from them, this is what they expect from you. And that really helped the dialogue and smoothed the dialogue.
It's interesting, the big companies, and to be honest, there's not that many of the big hardware, software players left in the world anymore. We won't even bother naming them, but I've had yourself and a couple of the others in the room.
Correct.
You can afford to do this. You can afford to look at the multiple different approaches because, first of all, you deliver into that space in multiple approaches.
Yeah.
But the competition that's out there are telling people, no, it needs to be this or it needs to be that.
Yeah.
This is one of the problems that we've got in the industry. HP can start to answer that from your angle, but what's your view on this?
Okay, so two things. The first thing, what we're trying to do is trying to say, look, guys, we're in an open world. We're in a world where people will make choices, and things need to be able to interact with each other, because we would be foolish to expect that people are prepared to take everything from us, or everything from IBM, or everything from Dell, or everything from anybody else. People will mix and match. They try to avoid what we call vendor lock-in. Okay, and in that process, you really need to work with open technologies, open environment, and making sure that you can interact with whatever is out there. And that's something that we've been doing over the years. We did it a long time ago with Unix and Linux and all of those things. We're doing it again today with cloud. That's one of the reasons why we embarked on the OpenStack consortium, and we're a big member of that, just to help that out. Because our belief is that particularly larger enterprises, SMBs, they'll probably end up in a public type cloud. over time. Startups definitely are. SMBs will go that way because of the difficulty that they have to really seriously and professionally manage IT environments. It's difficult for them because they can't have all the skills, or it's difficult for them to find all the skills that they actually need to run the whole thing in-house. So it's a tendency for them, it makes them life easier to actually rely on a supplier, on a provider to basically do the whole thing. But larger enterprises aren't ready to go that far. They're really looking at mixing and matching. And they want to mix and match according to what their needs are, not according to what one vendor delivers. So we have to live in an open environment. We have to live in an environment where we interact with others.
Over the years, I've kind of come to the conclusion that my beginning answer on almost everything is hybrid. Right?
Yes.
There's never anything on the left or on the right.
Correct.
Seldom is it an extreme. I mean, in the cloud space, it's clearly that. And this brings us nicely into the second question, because cloud being the next big thing, granted, combined with mobile, social, data, big data, small data, all of the other data. Well, we're in a very different kind of a scenario, but we're still in a place where I'm seeing people replacing the old that doesn't need replacing with something new, as opposed to transforming and transitioning as they go. So what we saw this with all of the different technologies over the years. So I'm not surprised that it's happening, and I think that there's a lot of value that people can get out of it. But is this any different than all of those other last big things that were so great? Because we have the same phenomenon happening here.
Yeah, I think there is one big difference though, and that is that if you look at the IT history in the past, the IT history was moving forward from the business first and then the consumers followed. Today with the cloud, it's exactly the other way around. We call it the consumerization of IT, and it's the end user who is used to use in his private life all these mobile apps and all of these things, quote unquote, out of the cloud. Most of the time he doesn't even realize it's out of the cloud, but okay. That actually starts putting pressure on IT to provide them the similar type of functionality and capabilities for his business life than what he has for his private life.
But that's not so different. If you go back to Windows 95, people wanted to upgrade from one to the other, and they've got something more exciting at home, and they're going into the office and they're sitting with an old version and they're wondering what's going on. So we know how IT departments have to work with budgets, economies of scales. So replacing the old with something new doesn't necessarily always matter. And the consumer model interrupting into the business space is definitely a critical part of it, and there's some good stuff there. But we are doing things with technology that aren't actually helping. And we've been doing that for 25 or 30 years. We make work and we make problems as opposed to solving them and earning money.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm looking for cloud and all of this other stuff to start making a difference there. Do you think that we're going to actually modify how we do things?
Well, I think when I talk to CIOs, the big discussion that I often have with them is, when you start going to the cloud, what do you do? Like you say, do you take your traditional application, your existing application, you're going to migrate it to the cloud? What's the benefit? Or do you say, let me keep my traditional application, let me look at the new requirements that I get from the business. Maybe some of those requirements overlap with some portions of that traditional application. Fine, develop the new pieces and turn out that portion of your traditional environment and sort of evolve to the cloud that way. That's one piece of the game.
Which is the way our IT model has meant to work, the way our life cycles are meant to work if you're actually planning this stuff for a business as opposed to for the fun of the technology.
That's right. And I think a number of CIOs are actually getting there. Some CIOs are still with their head in the sand and say, no, cloud is not for me, we don't move fast enough, we don't need that. But the bulk of the CIOs are starting to understand that this is a new phenomenon, that this can help them changing their position in the enterprise and become much closer to the business people and understand what the business people and support the business rather than just being that cost center that is actually beaten up all the time.
I don't know why this is so different than anything else though, because if I think about what enterprise architecture transformations should have done for IT businesses to be able to tie the business together and build the relationships, but they didn't.
No, they didn't. And I think there's one phenomenon, there's one element that is changing though, and that is that the younger generation that comes to work is a generation that is very much IT literate. If I go back to the beginning of my career, IT was this magic black box that was doing You probably remember that too. That was doing their stuff in their own corner. You sort of put in a request, and then maybe 9 to 12 months later, you got something that vaguely looked to what you actually asked for, because they didn't really understand what you were asking for.
And they didn't ask.
And they didn't ask. Okay, that dialogue wasn't there. Today, I have IT literate business people that go and ask, and if they don't get within 24 hours, they'll figure out another way to do it. Okay, that's this whole thing of shadow IT. And they will probably not care too much about the compliance and the security and all of these other things that keep the CIO awake, because they just want to get the job done. They're enthusiastic, they want to get things going. Okay, so that dialogue is actually changing things. The other element that plays in there is that the world is increasingly becoming digital. I mean, somebody said the other day that in the UK you've turned down analog TV. TV is now digital. Your music is digital. Your videos are digital. Your photos are digital. Your money is digital. Everything is digital. So the digital nature of things and IT is more and more creeping into business. 35% of the value of a car is electronics and IT today. And it's just increasing. So when you start thinking about all of that, IT is being used by an increasing amount of people around the organization, not just in the IT department, but increasingly in product development, in service development, by business people for doing a number of things. Marketing is using it for social media and social media analytics, and you name it.
Tool and die cutting using a 3D printer, another, granted it's not necessarily cloud, but it's all of the new technologies changing the behavior.
And so the one question that I have is, by 2020, and it's actually interesting, I saw a Forbes article on that today, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but by 2020, will there still be an IT department? Or will IT and the business just be the same thing?
When I was in uni, taking an accounting course at the same time as I was taking computer courses, I thought, we don't really need this accounting stuff. Computers will take care of this. Yeah. Well, 30 some years later, we've got lots more accountants than we ever had before.
Correct.
So I think that the tools are meant to, we're not quite at Skynet yet, right? So the tools are meant to assist the people to do the jobs better, stronger, faster, cheaper. And I quite often stress at the fact that we aren't really doing that in the past years, right? We're at a point now where we've got a lot of value that we can harvest from a bunch of stuff that we've been doing. We have slag heaps of data that people are calling big data, and they're looking for value in them.
Correct.
Which is a leftover byproduct that they can make money from. But how these guys apply with the business, when you've got consumers coming from home into the office, buying their own server, so they're bringing their own servers rather than their own devices. So I think IT is becoming more and more fractious, and I think IT is actually having to say no more often because of security.
But it's actually, it's really interesting that, and I'm thinking on one particular case, that forward-looking CIOs start to understand that, and start to understand that they really need to change the way and the mentality and the culture of IT, and move IT away from that deep infrastructure focus that has been the traditional focus from IT, to a focus which is much more related to services. How do I deliver services, and how do I add value to the business? Now that's a mentality change, and that's a critical piece. And in going to cloud, that's the difficult bit. It's not the technology. That's really the difficult bit. And that's going to take 3, 4, 5 years to get there.
But that's always been the same difficult bit with IT.
That has been. But there wasn't, how would I say?
Maybe the expectations or the demand?
No, I think we are at the break point, in the sense that we are at a point, up till now, you asked IT to think differently, but the environment that IT was operating in was always the same. The big data room in the back, the operation guys that were maintaining the systems up and running,
limited
the development
resources,
guys, limited resources. Okay,
yeah.
So now suddenly people start sourcing services from the outside world, from the clouds. Mm-hmm. So the way they operate and their responsibilities are actually changing. Now that's a moment that makes it easier to change the mentality of an organization. Because if everything else is the same, saying to people, look, you still need to do your same job, but you need to do it in a different way because you need to change, is always hard. It's easier to change when the underlying environment is also changing at the same time. And I think that due to the pressure for more agility and responsiveness on the one hand, and the pressure for cost cutting on the other hand, the fact that IT departments say, hey, I don't need to do everything on my own anymore. I can go and rely on external people. I can go and rely on cloud services. Rocks the boat a little bit of the traditional IT guys and say, oh my God, I need to have a different job here. So what's my job now going to be? So that makes them more, in my mind at least, more responsive to start understanding that they need to change, that they need to transform themselves. And that's why I'm reasonably hopeful that this time we may get it right.
So our next question is about regulation and standards. Two different words in many ways, but they're often being discussed in the same conversation these days. I'm really interested to hear your view. Sitting in Belgium, where you've got lots of people talking about things like regulation and standards and not knowing the difference in the definitions. Plus, you have a global role with HP, so you're taking a look at Canada, you're taking a look at, at Asia, you're taking a look at everything else that's in between. What do you think about this? Standards I like. Regulation I'm worried about.
Yeah, so two very different things. So let's start with the standards side. I think, like I mentioned, if you want people to be able to interact and to be able to choose from different environments and different sources, we're definitely going to need to have standards. Now, you have two types of standards. You have de facto standards, and then you have standards that are being built with standards bodies. The only annoying thing with standards bodies is it takes them about 5 years to come up with a standard. Okay. Now, cloud has been there for about 5-6 years, so we could expect the first standards of those quote-unquote official standards to start rolling out, but I haven't seen many of those yet. Now, you have a bunch of de facto standards.
And they're coming from a bunch of different places.
Oh yeah. So you have Oasis doing some things, you have many different people doing different things, and some of them overlapping, some of them complementary. So it's a reasonably, it's a modeled type of environment. I think we're involved in about 10 different standard bodies at the moment in and around cloud. Now, we're just being there because we want to be part of it, but we don't really know which is the one that's actually going to take over.
I'm going to jump in and ask. A company like HP, IBM, Dell, Oracle, all of the big guys can afford this. The smaller companies that want to get involved and be part of guiding things, they don't have the resources and the time and the money to do this.
That's absolutely right.
So standards are being imposed as opposed to being defined in some ways.
In some ways. So many of those standards actually also include very large users. So they keep us honest. Okay, that's one of those things that we need to pay attention on, but they keep us honest. But you're right, I mean, standards is also part of trying to make sure that what they come up with is in line with what you're doing and sort of other things. So that's actually part of the game in those. Now, the other side is you have a number of de facto standards. Obviously, you have Amazon, and you could consider Amazon as a de facto standard just because of its sheer size. And then you have what I talked about earlier, the OpenStack Foundation, which is a real interesting effort because...
Yeah, well, we both lived through lots of open efforts over the years, whether it was X-Open or open systems and everything over through the years. And I worry a little bit about companies like HP and the other folks changing open standards by putting their own label on it. So you have open standards, but then you have different flavors, so they aren't nearly as open to the ultimate end user. That's a bothersome issue.
So what we're trying to do in that case is we're trying to use everything that comes from the standard. So in this case, we're using everything that comes from OpenStack. But OpenStack isn't complete yet. And so we're adding stuff on top of OpenStack, but still by trying to use standards wherever we can. So I'll give you an example. OpenStack doesn't have a real orchestration capability today. We're talking about orchestrators. We happen to have an orchestrator that we can put on top of OpenStack. But we also want to make sure that our customers don't get locked in through the language that's actually used by that orchestrator. So we're transforming the language of that orchestrator to be Tosca compliant, which happens to be an Oasis standard.
So you're doing things differently than you did 15 or 20 years ago, or than any of the big companies did 15 or 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
Because then it was more like today with the phone, where we've got a nice Android standard and we've got 6 different flavors that make them all feel
Correct.
different.
Correct.
That is not good for the consumer, particularly in the business world.
No, and I, in my phone, I already moved to 2 versions of Android, and I had to relearn the way my phone was working 2 times because it was completely different. No, you're absolutely right. No, we try to avoid that. We're trying to make sure that people can evolve and can use what they've actually bought before. Because one thing is, okay, the standards evolve, they may not always be completely and fully compatible with what was happening before. But you as a customer, you've made an investment a year ago, you don't want to have to throw that investment away to get to the next thing, because that's what the standard goes. So we need to sort of juggle and manage both of those. That makes it sometimes a little bit difficult. So people are asking us, hey, why aren't you yet on the latest version of the standard? Well, guys, we're trying to get there, but we also want to make sure that we can take our customers with us. So that's an important thing of what we actually have to do in that particular space. But our objective is really very, very much like we've been in the past actually with Linux and with other things, is really stick as much as we can to the standards. But then start adding value on top of that in specific areas where the standard isn't resolving.
That's pretty good coverage on the standard side of things, and I actually quite like what I was hearing for the answer, so that's great. Now, talk to me about regulations.
Okay, regulations is an interesting one, because the cloud is global and the law is local. And we have to live with that, okay?
I like that. The cloud is global and the law is local.
Okay, well, you can
reuse
it
again.
Okay,
yes,
you can use that one again. So, and it's very much related to blocks. So the European side of things is very much about privacy. The US side of things is very much about security and homeland security and all of those things. And the two of them are not really going together all too well. Okay, and we know that with everything that we hear lately. If we really want to be able to take clouds globally, we're going to have to solve that issue. Now, I know that from the European Commission point of view, they're aware of this. They're actually starting to work on this and trying to get together with their American counterparts to really start transforming things. But we know that the politics are going to take time. I mean, this is probably going to take till 2020 before we actually get it resolved.
But what are they trying to resolve, though? I'm worried I'm sorry to cut in, but I'm worried. Are they trying to put together regulations for what's happening with the data? Or I believe the EU is actually trying to regulate the cloud itself, which is a little more complicated.
Yeah, no. So the first thing that they try to, the first thing that they're working on is the whole aspect of privacy data, okay, and private data. How can I maintain privacy of my information when my information sits in the cloud? And where I don't know where that information is, I don't really know who has access to that information. How do I make sure that I'm protected from a privacy perspective? That's the first thing that they're actually trying to resolve. And they understand that if we want to get to something, that is really what we need to do. The second element is we have Europe, and then within Europe we have 27, since 1st of June, 28 countries, that's right. We have 28 countries, and each of them have their own legislations. And those legislations also aren't fully compatible. Okay? The US and the European legislations in some places are actually contradicting, which is really interesting.
Well, and a lot of the regulations seem to be built on treaties that were designed before this level of interoperability and vast amount of communications occurred.
Absolutely. And so they're up for a review. They should be adapted to our current digital world. But
you think standard bodies take a long time to do things?
Oh yeah, yeah. But it was interesting because I had the opportunity at one moment in time to be part of one of the working groups that actually sort of tried to advise Nelly Cruz on this thing, and I was there with everybody else in the industry. You know how that works. And one of the things that I've been advocating is more transparency in public cloud. I want to know a number of things in and around my public cloud. A very simple thing is, if I consume, for example, a SaaS service, I want to know the supply chain that is actually delivering me that SaaS service. Okay, I don't know that today. Okay, I take Salesforce or Box or any others. I know that name, but are they running it on their own infrastructure or on somebody else's infrastructure? Who is doing their backups? Who is making sure that their security aspects, and so on and so on and so on. I have no clue. And like in that, I think it's a British game originally, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Okay? So I want to know that. Well, it was very interesting when I actually started talking about that. I got a lot of pushbacks from a lot of the large cloud providers say, no, 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 we don't want to give transparency.
Well, of course not.
Okay, but I think that is some of the elements that are actually going to need to happen. And when I see what the EU is trying to do is, I think the EU is trying to, you say regulate the cloud, I think it's trying to give more, and to force the cloud to be a little bit more transparent than what it is today, so that you as a user can really understand what you're getting into and what the implications are of the decision that you make to go with supplier A, supplier B, or supplier C.
So the EU sits there and they bring in all of the different vendors. And I've been to a Europe House a couple of times here in London as well. I don't think that they're doing the right things the right way. I think that they've got wrong people who don't know what they're talking about and making decisions. Well, like Neelie has come up a few times in this room before. She mentioned in a speech last year that the cloud is a great place. Put your data there. It's safe forever. It'll always be there. So she's actually misleading the consumers, the citizens that are meant to be represented.
No, that's a fair point.
I despair when we have that type of person making decisions about this type of thing.
Correct. You're absolutely right as far as that is concerned. When I look at the people that I actually met in some of those bodies, half the people are people that are subject matter experts or people that know what they're talking about, at least I hope I'm one of those, but that's a different story. The other half are actually lobbyists. And today they lobby on cloud and tomorrow they lobby on something else. So you very quickly start realizing that they don't really, they have a sheet of what they need to achieve and they don't really know where to get into. So it's become very, very difficult to actually be able to negotiate with them on something that really makes sense.
Which is part of the reason why I stress about regulation.
Yeah. And which means that it's going to take a long time to come up to something that is actually reasonable. I think the EU, to stick to the EU has a right understanding that cloud is critical for them and cloud is critical for the future of Europe and of digital Europe. I'm not sure they know exactly how to get there yet.
But I'm sorry, 10 years ago we could have just said IT is critical for the future of Europe, for the future of digital Europe. It's not just because we've got a different label on it and we've got a few more headlines. It's not so difficult,
I think why they had to jump in is now that things become more and more multinational and global. And if you go back 10 years ago, it was very much, IT was very much within the country. I was eventually outsourcing and do things, but I was within the boundaries of the country. So with this famous subsidiarity element, the EU didn't have to come in because this was country regulation, this was within the country. And so every country came up with their own regulations. Mm-hmm. Today, as a vendor, I don't want to have to set up a cloud data center in every country in Europe. I want to be able to sell from one country to another, okay? That has to meet two issues today. First, the networking cost across country boundaries is horrendous still and needs to be addressed, and I think they're doing some of that. Secondly, the legislations make it that, German financial information needs to stick into Germany. So if my data center is in Holland, bad luck, okay? And that is where they're actually trying to start adapting something so that they get more of a common regulation across Europe, that you can actually take full advantage of the technologies that you have and say, hey, I'm going to place 3 or 4 data centers around Europe and I'm going to address the whole of Europe with that. That gives us the economies of scale that we need, that gives us a whole bunch of other benefits. That actually can benefit the whole industry.
So if they actually did that, instead of all of the other stuff that they're actually talking about around it, I think that we'd have some luck. And hopefully with some of the experts that they've got in place advising them, they may actually move in that direction. But they have to stop being so romanticized by being seen with the technology and just worry about what it is functionally that they're meant to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point.
So that's going to bring us to our last question, where I want to chat a little bit about the future of this stuff. I see cloud and all of this other technology things. It's the plumbing, it's the motorway, it's where we're getting to. Today we've got stuff like big data and all kinds of access to information and applications and computing power. Where are we going with it all, do you think? What will come next, and how is the road to get there going to change along the way?
I personally believe that our life and the way we live and the way we approach life is going to change dramatically. I wrote a blog post probably about a month or 2 ago where I took this fictitious scenario saying that I'm walking along a street and suddenly I hear an ambulance. And the ambulance stops right near to me. And there's a guy in white coat coming out and saying, Mr. Verstraete, please come and sit in the ambulance because we just realized you're going to have a heart attack in 10 minutes and we want to avoid that. Okay. All the technology is there today, but we don't do it. Okay? I think that is the sort of things that we will start seeing moving forward. I ran into a young guy about a year ago who was working for a GPS manufacturer. And he told me, he said, oh, you're working on cloud. Well, I'm working in the cloud too. I said, huh, what are you doing? He said, we have an issue. We're very successful with our GPS. We have a real issue. I said, successful and an issue. How do those come together? Well, he said, look, if you're on a motorway and there's a traffic jam in front of you, your GPS gets a signal and calculates an alternate route. The problem that we have is we have one set of algorithms. And all the cars in front of you, they calculate the same alternate route. So we all end up in the same route, which means you have a GPS-enabled traffic jam on that alternate route.
Yeah, I like that.
I hadn't thought about that, quite frankly. And he said, so what we need to do now is we need to interact between the GPS and the cloud so that we understand what's happening, how many GPSs are out there, and smoothen the use of the GPSs across multiple alternate routes. That's a new service that we actually want to go and start delivering. Okay. These are just a couple examples of how using data that is provided, being it by the motorway, being by your GPS, being it by these new smart watches, being by whatever, you're going to get a whole bunch of new sets of services to really help you in your day-to-day life. And I think that's actually quite exciting.
Oh yeah, well, trust me, I love the idea. I mean, the type of convergence that I have in my pocket with the power 10 times the first computers I ever worked on. This type of stuff is amazing, that you get it all in a nice little package. I want the stuff that's actually functional and useful. I don't need my fridge to order milk for me.
No.
And I don't want it things done automatically because I don't like it that way. But we've got two things that are happening: a huge consumerization model to turn computers into robots, which I worry about the functionality actually being there yet, and then everything else that you just described.
Yeah, but you know, these things, people are going to bring things out on the market, all sorts of things. Some of them will succeed because there's a real demand. Some of them will fail. They may have a fashion period and they will disappear. So the market itself will actually tell what are scenarios that and use cases that are really applicable. You know, and we'll go, I believe, we'll go to a boom in startups that are actually going to deliver all sorts of things, from the connected car to whatever you can dream of, and probably things that we don't even dream of today. And again, some of them will succeed, some of them will fail. That's part of life, and that's part of business.
That's actually a pretty interesting angle on it. I find the direction of the market is going where it wants to take it. The consumer angle is making such a big difference these days that it didn't before, partly because every company is aware what every consumer has to say every step of the way.
Correct.
Because of this ubiquitous
because of this thing.
Yeah. But we're creating a lot of products that aren't necessarily doing something different. They're just doing the same thing in a different way. What I'm really excited about is waiting to see how people can start to innovate. We're doing a lot of thinking inside the box. We're getting a lot of value out of it. But as we start to take the things that you've described, the attitudes that we were talking about earlier on in terms of what companies can actually do to leverage it, allowing us to think out of the box. For the first time in 30 years, I actually think technology is going to start to make some really significant differences and add some real value, as opposed to just being part of what we've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And for example, the whole aspect around around health and basically health monitoring of older people and things like that, will, I believe, allow us to live probably longer and probably in a better state. So, hey, I want to be part of that. You know, I want to stay good as long as I can, and I want to live in a better state. And by the way, while that's happening, that's probably going to reduce some of the costs of health management and all of the things that are going around there. So I think there is a number of new things that are actually going to come out. But again, I'm not sure I know what they are yet, because if I knew them, maybe I could build one of those startups.
That's kind of what I've been thinking for the last 30 years, to be perfectly honest. Thanks very much for your time and to join us today, Christian. It's been really interesting to chat with you about cloud and get the HP and the EU view.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you.